Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Easy Conversations podcast, a podcast about having easy conversations. I'm your host, Furkan Dandia. In this week's episode, I'm excited to welcome Riana Milne, and we talk about childhood trauma. Riana shares how we can encounter childhood trauma at a young age and how that impacts us as we transition from adolescence to adulthood. Riana also shares how that trauma continues to show up in our relationships. We explore what people can do to overcome the trauma we carry for most of our lives and how we can make transformative changes. As someone who works with people in healing childhood trauma, I found this conversation with Riana extremely enlightening and eye-opening. Coach Riana Milne was featured in the March 14th, 2023 Influencer Daily, selected as one of the top coaches to follow in 2022 by Wealth Insider magazine. She's also been featured in Forbes magazine and Business Success magazine in 2023. She's a certified global life, love trauma recovery and mindset coach, advanced certified clinical trauma and addictions professional, a #1 best-selling author, the host of her own podcast called Lessons in Life and Love, an educational speaker, and a licensed mental health counselor for over 23 years living in Palm Beach County, Florida. Riana also won the 2022 GIVA International Award for Top Female Entrepreneur of the Year and Top Global Wellness Coach, and was selected in 2021 as one of the 100 most successful women around the world by the Global Trade Chamber. She was also a life and dating coach for the 12-show Docu-Series Radical Dating, Finding Lasting Love Over 40, and her client is now happily married. Riana specializes in those who have had past childhood or relationship trauma and offers group and VIP coaching programs for singles and couples globally. Riana's 5-star rated books, the #1 bestseller, Love Beyond Your Dreams, Break Free of Toxic Relationships to Have the Love You Deserve, and Live Beyond Your Dreams, From Fear and Doubt to Personal Power, Purpose, and Success, addresses life difficult transitions, personal transformation, the mindset for success, and having loving conscious relationships with yourself and others. You can find Riana online at her website, which is www.rianamilne.com. You can find her podcast, which is Lessons in Life and Love. And she's also been kind enough to share free ebooks that can be accessed in the show notes. And you can also download sample chapters of her book on her website. I hope you really enjoy this episode. And if you could leave a review at the end of the episode, I would truly appreciate it. All right, Riana, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really grateful for you taking the time and wanting to have this conversation with me today. But before we get started, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to the listeners and let us know a little bit about what it is that you do.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Thanks for having me today. My name's Riana Milne. I am a global certified life, love, trauma recovery, and mindset coach, #1 best-selling author, podcast host of my show, Lessons in Life and Love. And I help people, men and women, ages 16 to 76, to heal from past childhood and love relationship trauma, to go on to create the life they desire and have the love that they deserve.
Yeah, well, thank you for thank you for sharing that. I mean, you're doing a lot of important work, and I think what resonated for me based on your work was the whole aspect of helping people heal through their childhood trauma, because that's something I focus on as well in the work I do. And it's so important because I believe if those incidents from our past haven't been dealt with or brought to our awareness, they continue to repeat themselves in our adult life or in many situations in our life. And I also believe that they also prevent us from truly reaching our potential. And that's kind of what I'd like to share with the people I work with as well. What are your
No, it's
thoughts on that?
absolutely true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and most people don't know that that is what's holding them back.
Correct.
Um, that's the issue. Once they understand what it is and then how to change the subconscious into full conscious awareness, and they do the mindset tools. I call them my toolbox and mindset for success. That's what I've been teaching for over 40 years. Not only to people that come to me for coaching, but when I
Right.
was a model and talent agent as well. People want to be singers, models, actors, dancers. Well, how do you go from I want to be in the dream to actually doing it and being successful? And that takes mindset because there's a lot of fears and doubts when it comes to performing or, getting on stage or singing and feeling I can do this. That is
Right.
all mindset. So it's a childhood trauma piece that holds the mindset from being its best self.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And just, I mean, for me, I'm always curious to hear people's journeys. Like, what allowed you or motivated you to want to shift from being an agency individual to now doing coaching and helping people directly?
Well, we have to go further back, actually,
Okay.
to age 16,
All right.
when my very young best buddy, best friend was killed by a drunk driver. His name's Michael. And I was 16 and I wanted to go to a counselor for help to help deal with the grief. And my mom said, no one in this family will ever go to a counselor. And then I became defiant and said, well, then I will grow up and become one. So I always knew I wanted to help people overcome grief and hardship since I was a teenager. Then my healing began by reading. I was reading all the masters from Tony Robbins, Deepak Chopra, Wayne Dyer, the Dalai Lama, you name it. If it had something to do with healing and feeling good in life, that's what I was reading.
Right.
And I was modeling also from the age of 12. So by the time I was in Penn State for broadcast communications and working for a television station, but I needed some more part-time cash. So I was still modeling. And somebody asked me, why don't you open up a talent agency? We could really use that here. And that was in Erie, PA, this little town. And people said, that'll never work. You're crazy. And it's like, watch me, it'll work. And
Yeah.
that was part of the mindset. It was really strong by then. In another part-time job, I was helping people to open up their own businesses doing marketing and PR, and they had a lot of doubts in their belief system. So again, mindset was a big part of that education. So for me to teach model actors, singers, dancers was part of a hobby of mine that I always loved, and mindset went right along with that.
Right.
So that really fell into line. And then I had my two daughters to raise, and I figured, I can go back to school for my master's in psychology once they're raised, and that's what I
Right.
did. So I went back later in life, got a triple master's in clinical counseling psychology, opened up my private practice as a licensed mental health counselor.
Mm.
And when the coaching model came out, which I always loved because it was more educational, it was more solution focused.
Right.
People got real answers much quicker than the dragging out therapy and just asking, how do you feel about that? It was funny. We had a project in my master's, go to 5 counselors and report on the one you like the most. I said, I don't like any of them. Nobody helped me with anything. I said, this is
Right.
ridiculous. I don't want to be one of those counselors. So I love the coaching model. I got certified 2009 and 2010 and started writing my books, Live and Love Beyond Your Dreams. And then I went through a second love trauma. So the first one happened with my Penn State love, who I married, and the second one happened later in life. And his comment was, I don't know why I sabotage everything I love. And I said, I don't know either, but I got to figure it out.
Right.
Now, in my master's program, we never heard the words childhood trauma
Mm.
or love relationship trauma. And it's not in the DSM-4, which is our diagnostic model,
Right.
the book that we have to use. So I said, I don't know what it is either, but I have to figure it out because that's only where my healing was going to come from. So I went
Right.
to 7 therapist friends of mine. Nobody knew what he had, what causes a secret life on there. Where does that come from? Well, I need to know. And then I went deeper into the psychological journals and did the research. And ironically, all my work from year 2000 up to that point was working with people of trauma.
Mm.
So I was working in the schools for kids, students of traumas at every grade level, kindergarten all the way through college. I worked in a mental health ward with kids 5 through 19 for a hospital group. I worked at a drug and alcohol rehab center for adolescents and another one with women from the prison system,
Mm.
all just make cash as a single mom, right? So I was hustling. But the point was all these different jobs had to do with these childhood trauma pieces that were never healed. So
Right.
from that, my real work experience, I created the childhood trauma checklist in 2012, put that together with my research and my real work experience. And it's a very simple assessment tool. I still use it today, and I know it's being used now around the world. And it helps my clients to identify which of the top 10 traumas that they experience. And then I look at the degree of intensity, how hard was that for them when they went through that? And then
Right.
what is showing up for them today in life, love, or business, and that they're struggling with? And what are their dreams and goals? And then that is where we heal all the past and get them super focused for their present and their future.
Right. Right. Well, thank you for sharing all that. And you kind of stayed true to your dream of becoming a counselor and
Yeah.
achieved it in the end. So that's amazing. Now, coming back to the whole notion of childhood trauma, why do you think people struggle to bring it to their awareness? I mean, there's tons of research and there's the whole idea of a lot of the times it's easier to repress it and it kind of gets, stored in our subconscious. But what are your thoughts around all of that?
There's something we call behavioral norms, but it
Mhm.
becomes so normalized you just don't even see it as being different or a problem. Or doesn't everybody have this?
Yeah.
An example of that would be I was doing the checklist. Well, my assessments, I have 6 assessments when they meet with me for a discovery session. And we did a childhood trauma, and she did mark down or tell me anything about physical abuse. So 2 worksheets later, she goes, "Yeah, but my dad used to hit us with a switch." I'm like, "Well, wait a minute. You didn't mark down physical abuse." She goes, "Oh, no. I mean, everyone in the neighborhood got hit with a switch." Like, it was so normalized, and me as a counselor in the schools, I would have had to report that to Division of Youth and Family Services, which we call DYFUS in New
Right.
Jersey, because that child was being abused, but she didn't see it as abuse. It was just normalized. So
Mhm.
that's an example of people just don't see it. And that also comes down to communication styles, like being passive aggressive. Where does that come from? Well, let's say the little boy found, mom and dad fighting a lot because dad was an alcoholic. So he
Mhm.
tried to defend his mom, and the dad would pick him up and throw him across the room or slap him, or he goes, "Don't say a word or you'll be punished 10 times worse." So he learned to be safe is I shut down, I say nothing, and just
Mhm.
wait till everybody just settles down. And with his parents, that could have been a day or two. So it's the same routine he's doing with his wife. He'll shut down, not say anything, and she goes, "Well, let's talk about it." He doesn't want to. It
Mhm.
doesn't feel safe. The same triggering is happening in the brain and the body. It's reacting to this fear that he experienced as a young child.
Right.
So it's really the normalized patterns of what worked, what didn't work, and the survival patterns of the child. And then they were never corrected.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so interesting because we just learned, to your point, those behaviors at such an early age. And it's just normalized and we just manage to continue with those behaviors. Now, one of the things that I've realized and I've seen is often there is that conflict, right? You kind of become an adult and you're going through your relationships or you're at work. You do notice that something doesn't feel right, but you're just repeating those some same patterns without knowing where that's coming from. So, how do people bring that childhood trauma to their awareness based on the work you do?
Well, for me, they do the simple childhood trauma checklist. And it's my form of questioning that I ask them. They mark it, and then I do a series of questioning around each one that they mark.
Mhm.
And then they're going back into that experience and explaining further. So that's where I can tell the severity levels. But if
Right.
you'd like, I'll go into what the top 10 traumas are so our listeners can get an idea of what that means.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people hear trauma and they think of what we call big T trauma,
Yeah.
which could be, let's say, a car accident and you lose a limb. That's certainly super traumatic, or
Right.
experiencing a rape or something like that. But it's the repetitive emotional traumas, which they call little T traumas, which are really causing havoc in people's lives and relationships.
Right.
So there are more than 10 traumas, but before I share them, I just want to say that, all the research shows that this goes through at least 3 generations. And it is also now shown to change some gene expression, like families from survivors of the Holocaust,
Right.
right? And so if you feel the trauma or these ones count for you, mom and dad had traumas too, and so did their parents.
Right.
So it does go through the generations. We're not looking to blame anyone at this point or for you to even feel ashamed because 2021, the research shows 100% of us have definitely experienced childhood trauma. When I
Right.
was first doing this research, my first ebook is Why Not 90% of People Struggle in Life and Love. It was 90% back in 2020.
Yeah.
Now it's at 100% in 2021. So would you like me to go through those top
Yeah,
10 trauma?
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, this is also very different from the Kaiser Permanente list that did the ACE test. It's called ACE, adult childhood experiences. But I'll go through my list and say where it's different.
Yeah.
So the first one is if you grow up with anyone in the household having any addiction. So the Kaiser group only says drugs or alcohol. Well, I'm an addictions counselor, so I know there's a whole lot more. So I
Right.
name them all. There's drugs, alcohol, sex, meaning you knew your parent was a cheater and you were holding that secret. Porn, gambling, hoarding, spending, eating, gaming, TV watching, workaholism, and social media or computer addiction, or being on the phones all the time.
Right.
I'd say there's addiction. Second one is emotional abuse or neglect. The next one is verbal messaging. So, what did you hear when you were growing up? Did you hear, I love you, I'm proud of you? Or did you hear more critical things and put downs like that made you feel not good enough? A
Mm-hmm.
lot of the baby boomer generation did not hear the words, I loved you. I was one of them. But that just was not spoken by my parents.
Right.
And instead, if I even did my best at something, she goes, well, it's still not as good as so and so. So we
Right.
never heard the compliment.
Yeah.
Make me feel like, that's the workaholic, by the way.
For
If you
sure.
didn't hear those compliments, then the next one is any physical abuse, rape, or molestation. That's trauma 4.
Mm-hmm.
Trauma 5 is around abandonment. I named 2 types. Now, Kaiser Permanente did not have abandonment at all. And I thought it was such a
Mm-hmm.
huge miss for all the population I worked with. So, no fault is having a parent that died early,
Right.
having a parent going off to serve for war, or having a parent that was out of the home most often because that's how they work to support the
Right.
family. Okay. Then there's fault. The fault is never being in your child's life, being in their child's life while the couple was together. It's a breakup. Then you really rarely see the child.
Mm.
Then the last one is you're present in the home, but you're not emotionally attached. You
Right.
might come home from the office, eat dinner, then go into the home office, never go to your child's sport events or art plays, whatever. Okay, so that's the abandonment piece. Then trauma 6 is if you're ever from the foster care system. That
Mm.
was a huge miss. I worked with the foster care kids. I knew how much childhood trauma they had. I'm like, how could they miss these kids?
Right.
So
Yeah.
the foster care kids that were adopted or had to go live in other people's homes because their parents couldn't afford to keep them in their home. Even if
Mm-hmm.
it's grandma and aunt and uncle, it's still being displaced. Okay.
Right.
Trauma 7 is personal trauma. So that's feeling different for some reason. So you could have been a chubby child going to school and you got teased for that, or skinny and gawky and called a nerd. You could have been the only African American in an all Caucasian school, coming out as LGBTQ and, feeling not accepted by your family or your peer group.
Right.
Any way that you felt different, not smart enough, identified as ADHD, right? So all these different ways. Me working in the schools, I saw that all the time.
Mm.
Kids just not feeling like they measured up.
Yeah.
Trauma 8 is around the siblings. So there's 3 different situations. The sibling could have been bullying you. Most often they are considered the golden child by the parents. So the more handsome or beautiful, the star student or the star athlete, you're always compared. You're not as good as your sister or your brother.
Right.
Right. And then the third way is that they were born with a medical condition that commanded more of mom's and dad's time, leaving you kind of out of this place
Mm-hmm.
there. Trauma 9 actually has 2 traumas now because I had to bring down trauma 11. That one was not very busy when I first developed this list, and that was community trauma. Now it's one of the busiest ones with COVID. Our
Right.
communities were impacted around the world. This is our mass shootings, our school shootings, our mother nature events, floods, fires, hurricanes, destroying neighborhoods.
Right.
Very a lot of destruction there. And then that also impacts the family, of course. So there's family trauma, incarceration of any family member. But
Yeah.
also, if you grow up in a scary neighborhood or there's a lot of lack messages, like we don't have enough money to pay the heat bill, or with COVID, we're all going to lose our homes, all these fear based messages were going on at that time.
Yeah.
Um, Also, the military families in the US, they move every 2 to 4 years. That makes the child the new kid in school all the time. So
For sure.
that moving lifestyle. So there's a lot under family. That's just a few examples. And then trauma 10 is if your parents had mental health disorders. And the baby boomers, we didn't see our parents go to counseling. Like I
Right.
said, it was painful back then. We
Yeah.
weren't going either. You better believe the Mills weren't going to go to counseling.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, that would be if mom and dad, the top two most difficult for kids to navigate was bipolar and borderline personality disorder. So borderline very quickly is real erratic moods. When they're good, they're great. When they're bad, they're horrid. And the children never knows what they're going to get. So that keeps that child very anxious. Then bipolar means manic depressive. So depression can show up as anger or emotionally checking out. And a manic phase, people think, well, that's when they're high and happy.
Mm.
Yes, sometimes, but it's often tied to an addiction, like a
Right.
spending spree, a gambling spree, and then it, can snowball into something,
For sure.
pretty devastating. So those are the top 10 traumas. And most people are found to have 4 to 6 of them.
Yeah, yeah, and that's exactly like, thank you for sharing that list, because and you could easily see why 100% of the population would have experienced childhood trauma. And to your point, you could easily have more than one. And
Yeah.
in your what you're saying is it could be between 4 to 6. So I can easily see that applicable to many people. Now,
And then it's, how do they show up? Do they show up in different ways in relationships and then in life and then in business? And actually, there's a map that I have of the 7 life areas where childhood trauma shows up. And we could go to that first. One is physical, and that's where the Kaiser really spent their study. So with 17,000 people, they were seeing people with unhealed childhood trauma had earlier death,
mhm,
sleep disorders, eating disorders, irritable bowel syndrome, immune dysfunction like fibromyalgia, Epstein-Barr virus, cardiovascular disease, these kinds of things.
right,
Definitely an emotional component where there's difficulty, controlling the emotions, can't cope very well, have a lot of shame and guilt around things, excessive worry, high
yeah,
anxiety, feelings of hopelessness, and then in relationships, attachment problems,
right,
uh, low trust of themselves or their partner, poor social interactions sometimes, getting into these cycles of abuse and neglect constantly. And then there's a mental health category, which is depression, anxiety, suicidality, low
right,
self esteem and confidence. Behavioral is another category. Poor impulse control is under that. Sexual acting out, poor, drug and alcohol or any other addiction
right,
to cope, right?
mhm,
And then there's 2 for children, which is cognition and brain development. So while I was working in the elementary school, a lot of my little kids there were immediately they wanted to put them on ADHD medicine. I'm like, well, like
right,
and they have a traumatic home situation going on. Let me have a little bit of time. I'm going to do some behavioral modification. I had star charts all over my wall. We did meditation to music.
right,
I found that very helpful and, other different modalities to calm everything down. Because what they didn't understand back then is when the child comes into the school anxious, cortisol is up and memory and learning is down. So if
right,
I can calm the brain and the body down with some of these techniques, then they go back to the classroom, they're more able to learn and retain the facts. And
mhm,
they're great for going up without the medication.
right,
I also had a fabulous Indian doctor that I sent these kids to with their families, and he'd totally take the chemicals out of their diet.
Yeah.
And he'd go around his health store and say, this vitamin, and this one, to help cleanse the body of these
Right.
chemicals that are in the foods.
For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, it's so important you mentioned that piece with kids because nowadays that's the immediate response if someone displays some of the ADHD
But
tendencies.
they're not understanding this is,
Right.
reaction to childhood trauma that's going
Right.
on in their lives.
Yeah, and that's a huge problem, right now, and I've talked about it previously on the podcast too, is because even in the education system, perhaps, and to no fault of their own, the teachers don't have the tools and the awareness to be able to support these children, so it's almost easier to get
Well,
them on meds.
yeah. And I was a special hire, right? We were
Right.
called a SAC counselor, student assistance counselor. And
Yeah,
we were under special grants, and, I had my own school, it was like a war zone when I went in there. But luckily, everything calmed down within like a month and a half. We had all these different programs in place. And when the budget was gone, they didn't cut the football coach. They cut the counselors handling these emotional issues in these kids. And I'm like, when are the schools going to get it? Every school needs a trauma recovery counselor or
right.
coach in there,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
for sure, and
saying they're missing it. They're missing the point
yeah,
of all this.
absolutely, absolutely, and coming back to, you touched on all the ways that trauma shows up. I mean, you could see it. It shows up in all aspects of our lives. But once you gain awareness, there's this whole idea, okay, people struggle with, okay, well, now I have awareness. What do I do with it? Right. And there's that
Okay.
whole healing journey that needs to take place. And for me, based on personal experience and what I see with other people, often that healing journey is just something you go on forever and you're constantly finding ways of healing yourself. But
Yeah.
yeah, so what do you do with the people you work with once that awareness has come to them now and it's now taking the next step moving forward?
So the part one is understanding what childhood dynamics they had.
Right.
Part two is how's it showing up in their life. So let's go into relationships for a second.
Yeah.
Then when we understand what's going from A to B, then I know how to heal that. That's part C. Because
Right.
everybody is different. It's a different puzzle for me because not everyone has the same traumas or the same severities of
Right.
traumas, right? So they're showing up in different ways. So that's how I have to diagnose next. So let's go into some relationship things. So jealousy and control. If you have a partner that's very jealous, very controlling, that comes from trauma 7, not feeling good enough, and usually trauma 2, which is verbal messaging. Hearing those put downs, you're not good enough, change your outfit, you look fat in that, own those slurs. So that
Right.
comes from causes jealousy and control. If you were someone that had abandonment, either fault or no fault, that can show up as codependent relationships
Mhm.
and a lot of love addiction. So
Right.
consciously, this guy's not good for me. But you keep going back to them. And the research shows this is what we call RRS, relationship repetition syndrome. They go
Right.
back an average of 7 times. Break up, get back together. Break up, get back together. And it's a very vicious, toxic cycle.
Right.
And it's because the abandonment piece in them has not been healed. So it's either going back to the same person or you break up, you finally break up and you read all these self-help books and you're like, I got it now. I'm going to go out and find someone totally different. And then we have what's called same person, different face,
Right.
same personality type. And so I usually get them by round 3. Rihanna, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And I said, I get it. I've been there.
Yeah.
So you can't change what you don't know or understand. That is my
Right.
quote, because you've got to understand it, right? So if they had abandonment issues, we have to heal that. We have to do more self-love. Anger and yelling and acting out comes from seeing that happen in your household and saying that this is the normal way to handle a problem. We yell and scream at each other, and usually the loudest one wins. And
Mhm.
that's how they learn to handle an issue. Well, no, they have to learn a whole new set of communication skills with me and
Right.
working as a team. Um, there's often a lot of perfectionism, right? Inside and outside of the home that can work well on the job site, being some good control on the job, but always nitpicking and controlling or trying to make your partner perfect is a
Right.
real problem because you're eroding their self-esteem. The blaming behavior, if you keep blaming other people, never taking responsibility, that can show up, or needing to be right because you were never given the words to speak as a child. You weren't allowed to speak up. And if you weren't right, you were wrong and maybe punished. A lot of addictions stem from this starting as a child. um, Something called blurting out. We had a top politician who did a lot of blurting out here in America, not thinking before they speak,
Right.
embarrassing themselves and others. That is from a childhood trauma pattern.
Right. Right.
Okay. So there's all different ways this can show up. Those are just a few examples. So how do I heal them? So the next step is, and then I look at business. So how's it show up in business?
Yeah.
Well, you might be in a job you hate your entire life, but you're afraid to make the move.
Right.
That's the one that grew up with, you better keep making money and don't do anything to lose your job. Be grateful you have the job, go for the gold watch, which is never given anymore.
Right.
Um, so you're afraid to make that move. Or if you're an entrepreneur, you'll go so far that then you won't invest in yourself.
Mm.
You've heard these lack messages, or you can't do that type messages. It will never work for you type messages.
Right.
Okay. That's how that shows up in business, or the toxic boss that is so nasty, to everyone, or that competing coworker that
Right.
always has to beat you out and say, see, aren't I great? Aren't I good? I'm better than you kind of thing.
Mm.
That whole competition thing to show that they are of better value than their coworker. So
Right.
these are ways it shows up at work. And then I already went into the medical stuff. So,
Yeah.
okay. So once we analyze all that, and then the next part is the healing journey.
Yeah.
And I describe it like a rainbow. You're starting on the left side of, I don't know what I don't know. So there's a lot of education. So going up the rainbow is all education. And I use from my research, a 150-page workbook that I created. It's a trademark system that I use. And we work as a team. So how they fill out their worksheet and give it back to me, I can see those answers, and then I know how to specifically help them back.
Right.
So this goes on for a period of time. Now, I'm also what's called a CCTP Advanced Level 2, which is Certified Clinical Trauma Professional. I have a whole lot of tools in that toolbox
Right.
that I pull out, a lot of mindset work. I also use vitamin therapy. We do meditation, but it's all holistic, mind, body, spirit. There
Right.
is a faith-based component to this because you have to have faith that your life can change and will change
Mm.
if you do these techniques. There's
For
a
sure.
lot of practice because we are rewriting the subconscious to make you now fully consciously aware.
Mm.
So there's a lot that go into it, and it's like a step at a time using the worksheet. So that's how we break it down. There's goal setting. What do you want in your life that you don't have now? We
Right.
look at that and so forth. So there's a lot of different techniques that I use.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and for sure. Thank you for expanding on that. And there's the biggest thing to take out of there is that no matter how you approach it, there needs to be a lot of work that needs to take place. Right.
Yeah,
And
this
well,
is like
often,
I say, it's not a fluff course,
no. Yeah.
And but they love it because they start really feeling less anxious already between the vitamin therapy and the meditation within 7 to 10 days. So they're already feeling better. And then the mindset exercises, they start doing them from class 1. So by week 2 and
Mm.
3, they're starting to feel better. People are noticing them at work. Oh, you're happy. You look good today. Your energy is good. What are you doing different? So people notice really right away. But the
Right.
most important thing is the practice. And in real
Yeah.
life trauma work, they say if you can have your client for 6 months, that is ideal. So that is my chosen time to work with people from 4 to 6 months.
Yeah.
So that I can really make sure everything is set. And then it's not only the healing. Now we have to go on to the part 2 of the program, which is love. Okay, so if they didn't know how to love properly and didn't get those skills, which none of us really did as
Right.
children, most of us didn't have ideal families or parents
Mhm.
that we were watching their way of loving. So now what is the emotionally healthy, evolved, and conscious relationship? That's what they have to learn, what that looks like.
Right.
And how, if they're single, to go out there and look for a partner like that.
Mhm.
and express their feelings, which we call empowered communication, being able to speak up their wants, needs, desires. And then for the couple, I have to teach them those communication skills where they're starting now to work as a team. We have to heal partner A's trauma, partner B, and the relationship. So that part two is now getting them to communicate totally differently and with more love and compassion and friendship. So before, where they might have taken something personally because their partner walked in the door in a bad mood, not knowing he was criticized by the boss who sounded like his father. So he came out feeling less than. So now he's mad
Yeah.
at the world, but the wife says, oh, he's mad at me again. Now what did I do? So,
Mhm.
all that misperception, which we call false negative assumptions, that has to be all cleaned up.
For sure. For
There's a
sure.
lot of work to do. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the biggest piece, right? I feel like often people want a quick fix solution, and that's seldom the case because you're dealing with something that's been buried deep for a really, really long time. And
Yes.
you're having to uncover it and come to terms with it. And then the other piece, obviously, as we talked about earlier, if you've had 4 or 6 of those early childhood traumas, you may be able to heal one, and then another one may come to the surface. And a lot of people get discouraged at that point because they're like, well, I thought I dealt with it. And, I, because there's could be 4 or 6 different sources of trauma, you may have to deal with each one
We
independently as
do
well.
deal with all of them, but
Yeah.
the main key of what's happening is the mindset is off. The mindset is, which I call, you're either living in the dark side or in the light side of
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
So when you have the fear-based negative thinking that comes from any trauma and any severity level, that's being in the dark side.
Yeah.
And then there's living in the light side, which is that joy and bliss and peace and love and contentment, and this is what I'm always striving to teach them to, is that a fear-based thought or is this a love-based thought?
Mm.
So I'll give you a little bit of the differences of living in the dark and the light side.
Yeah.
Right. And I use the little yin yang symbol to
Right.
describe this to my people. Okay.
Yeah.
So the dark side is the dark paisley with a little white dot. And living in the light is a white paisley. And we put that on the right side. And there's a little dark dot. So again, this is where joy and bliss and happiness and purpose and love, everything that feels great. So the little black dot to our family represents challenges. And in
Mm.
Buddhism, they call us being in the world the earth school. We're
Right.
here to learn certain lessons, right? So
Hmm.
we expect challenges to come. This does not throw us off. And when it does, we're thinking, what can I do
Right.
to solve this problem? So let's use the example of COVID when people were told you have to stay in your house for 30 days. Oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my job. I won't have any money. It's all this negative fear-based thinking, right? My first thought is, oh my gosh, I have 30 days to get some more work done. Maybe I'll finish that book I'm working on.
Yeah.
It's like, what can I do with that extra time? That's
Hmm.
exactly where my head went to. So it's not, saying, okay, it's a challenge. We got to stay inside. All right. Maybe this is part of the solution. What
Hmm.
can I do with that time?
Right.
So that's immediately when you're trained in mindset where your head would go versus to the poor me victim mentality.
Yeah.
Okay. So on the dark side, we call that the reactive side. Like, oh no, that's the reaction. We are proactive. We take action. Okay. The dark side is unconscious. It acts out. It does not think before it does, speaks, writes, or acts. We're fully consciously aware before we do any of that.
Mm.
We're thinking, is this good for all? Not only for me, but for the all, everyone. So this is where conscious choices are made. What we say, write, text, what we do. The unconscious, we call it uneducated on mindset. And the conscious awareness is educated and uses mindset tools. And our people will use this the rest of their life
Hmm.
because by 6 months, it becomes so normal. That is their new normal. And their
Right.
whole life has changed. And they're like looking back because we do this exercise on the last day we call graduation, looking back to where they were in the beginning. We have
Right.
this chart. And then what is their new scores? They're like, oh my God, I've changed so much in every area of my life. We have this pie. It's like 18 areas. All those scores have gone up. And because they're fully consciously aware, they're not going to go back to where they were
Right.
before. So it's negative fear-based thoughts. Here it's positive love-based thoughts. Over there, it's I can't do this mentality. This is what can we do, you know?
Mhm.
And on the dark side is where anxiety and depression lie, um, fear, anything that's dark, negative,
Right.
murder, rape, anything that makes you feel bad. And here we have hope. It's very much based in spirituality, trust, that the universe has got us.
Right.
And on the left side, you feel stuck in life. You often say no to opportunities. We always say yes and go for what we think is going to serve us or our next adventure in life. So it keeps our life positive and exciting. And we reach a lot of accomplishments in our dreams because we're used to saying yes to ourselves and having
Right.
the faith to follow through.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that explanation. And that being in that dark side can also be, you know, revelatory, because then it means that there's something you need to work through and perhaps get shift into that light side. And that's something, I guess, you know, being proactive, that's important. Even if you've done your healing, always being aware of when you fall into that dark side and
Yeah.
maintaining some of those practices that you've talked about. That's a lifelong journey.
That's when all their mindset tools, if they know that, I mean, we all will go through sad times if we lose a friend or something,
Mhm.
and then what can you do with that? Well, I can remember the good times. I can put a memorial out with plant a pretty tree and go and sit there and think of him. So it's always immediately, what can I do with that loss?
Yeah.
Or what can I do with this problem? Um, so you just get used to doing that, which is full conscious awareness and living. And not too many people live in conscious awareness, and it feels great when you do.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. But thank you, Rihanna. This is amazing, and I appreciate everything you covered. It's been very useful for me as well to kind of hear all of this, and I'm sure the listeners will gain a lot out of this knowledge too. But for listeners that do want to get a hold of you or find you, what are some ways they can do that?
Sure. Well, the best place is to start at my website. It is my name, riannamill.com. And on there is my free ebook, Have the Love You Deserve, right on the homepage. If you feel you want help and want to work with me, there is a really great promotional special going on for the discovery session. You sign up and work with me there. There's the first 60 pages of my books, Live and Love Beyond Your Dreams, free. You can download those. And the 4 free love tests are on there. And one is the childhood trauma checklist. So you can use all of that. And then my podcast is called Lessons in Life and Love with Coach Riana Milne. There's like 115 shows out. And my YouTube, I think I have 250 educational videos under Riana Milne.
Great. I'll put all of that in the show notes. But thank you again for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Nice being with you today. Thank you.
Thank you for checking out this episode with Rihanna. As always, please leave a review or a comment in the comment section. I always love hearing from you. And please subscribe to the podcast if you already haven't done so. That's the best way to support the podcast. Thank you, and until next week.